Welcome to How to Make Moccasins, Volume 1, Plains Indian Hard Sole Style. For centuries, moccasins have been an essential part of Native American clothing. At first, Indian people used animal hides wrapped around the foot and tied in place with a leather thong. Among the Plains Indians, the hard sole moccasin represented one of the most highly refined forms of Native American footwear ever developed. At a powwow, you'll see an array of newly made beaded moccasins in many different tribal styles. Traditional tribal craftspeople still produce high-quality moccasins, and you can still find them for sale at Native American trading posts throughout the country. Now, you can make your own custom-fitted pair using the techniques you'll learn in this video. We'll show you how to make a pattern that properly fits you or the feet of an adult, young person, or infant. We'll visit a craft store and select the materials you'll need. We'll take you step by step in cutting out the leather for the upper and the sole, stitching the sole and the upper together, and finishing off the heel. You'll see a variety of tribal styles, and we'll give you suggestions on additional decorations and tips from experienced moccasin makers. So let's get started. A grocery sack works well for drawing the outline of your feet or the feet of the person you're making the moccasins for. If you're making moccasins for yourself, have someone else draw around your feet. Stand barefoot on a hard surface. Feet should be evenly spaced and weight evenly distributed. Hold the pencil or pen upright and draw around each foot. For some people, the right and left foot are slightly different in shape and size. Measure each foot separately and make a pattern for each foot if necessary. To get the right measurement for the arch of the foot, cut a thin strip of paper and measure across the foot where you would ordinarily tie a shoestring. Make a mark on each side where the paper touches the floor. Do this for both feet. Mark the paper strips left and right. Later, we will use this measurement to check that the upper pattern is correct. Now we're going to adapt this outline of the foot to make a pattern for the sole. Draw a straight line from the outside of the heel to the little toe. Draw a second line from the outside of the big toe to the inner heel. When drawing the lines, ignore the part on the inside of the foot just behind the big toe, as well as the inward curve in the middle of the foot. It's a common tendency for beginners to make the sole too wide. Round out the portion for the toes by drawing a single curved line touching the tips of the toes. You don't need to make indentations for the individual toes. If you're going to wear socks with the moccasins, make the length 1/4 inch longer at the heel. Mark the patterns right and left, put your name on them, and cut them out. Now we're going to show how to measure and cut out a pattern for the upper part of a low-cut moccasin. You may want to make these hard sole moccasins into a boot with a wraparound top, such as a traditional woman's style or a man's high-top rendezvous style boot. Be sure to watch the rest of the video before cutting out the uppers for this style. The next few steps take time and careful measurements so the moccasins will fit properly. You can also refer to the diagram in the printed insert. Lay out another large piece of the grocery sack. To begin the pattern for the right upper, draw a rectangle. The length of the rectangle is the length of your right foot plus 2 inches for sizes 3 to 8 and 2.5 inches for sizes 9 and up. In this example, a size 12 shoe, the right sole pattern is 11 3/4 inches long. We add 2.5 inches, a vertical line totaling 14 1/4 inches. The width of the rectangle is the length of the right foot, in this case 11 3/4 inches. Draw a straight line across the width 1/2 inch up from the bottom of the rectangle. Then divide this larger rectangle into 4 equal sections. Don't include the 1/2 inch section at the bottom. Use the ruler to divide the lines in half and draw the rectangles. Divide the upper left section into 4 equal vertical sections. Mark points A and B. Divide the upper right section into 4 equal vertical sections and mark point C. Add points D, E, and F. Next, draw a straight line between A and E and continue to the top of the pattern. Draw a straight line between C and D and continue to the top of the pattern. At about 1 1/2 inches from the top, draw a curved line to B. Connect point B and C with a gentle arc. To allow for the heel, connect points D and F and E and F. For the low-cut style of moccasin only, draw a T for the foot opening. The top of the T is 2 inches long, an inch to each side of the center line. For the stem of the T, use the lower half of the vertical center line. Cut out your paper pattern. Cut out the T. Try the pattern over the right foot. It should touch the ground plus a little more, about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. If it doesn't, you'll need to adjust the pattern. In this example, the foot is narrower than normal. Notice that the paper pattern hangs over more than it should at the sides. Here's where the paper strip we made comes in handy. First, bring both of the marks together. Make a crease to mark the center between the marks. Center the strip of the pattern on the top of the T. We need to trim the pattern on each side. We add 1/4 inch on each side of the line and mark it. This 1/4 inch allows room to sew the upper to the sole. Measure the amount you came in from the edge of the pattern and come in that far at point E and D. With the straight edge, draw a line through those marks. Trim that much off each side of your pattern. Round the corners. Try the pattern on again. It should touch the ground plus about 1/8 of an inch. This pattern may also work for the left foot. Flip the pattern over and try it. If your feet are close to the same size, the pattern will work for both feet. If not, repeat the steps for drawing the rectangle using the length of your left foot. If you cut too much off of your paper pattern, it will pay off in the long run to take the time to redraw and cut out another pattern. If you made a pattern for each foot, mark them left and right. If your foot is wider than normal, you may need to go back and increase the width of your rectangle. You may also check the width of the pattern with the paper strip. That measurement should match the distance between A and C plus about 1/4 of an inch on each side. Now that you've cut out your patterns for the sole and the uppers, it's time to go buy leather. Take your patterns to a leather or craft store. Insist on getting the right leather for this project. Don't run the risk of these stitches and beadwork ripping out and ruining hours of work. Thickness in leather is measured by weight. Thicker pieces are heavier. If you buy leather that is too thin, less than 4 to 5 ounces, your stitches may rip out when you try to sew the moccasin pieces together. For the lower part, the soles, you'll need heavy leather. 2 pieces of latigo or vegetable tanned unfinished cowhide at least 8 to 10 ounce weight. Have the salesperson use your right and left foot pattern as a guide in cutting out 2 rectangular pieces. You'll cut the leather to exact size later. For the upper part of the moccasin, you'll need soft, flexible leather. 2 rectangular pieces of commercially tanned buckskin, elk, or split cowhide in 4 to 5 ounce weight. Other types of lightweight leather may tear. The dimensions of these 2 rectangular pieces of soft leather should be 1 inch wider and longer than the rectangle you drew for your upper pattern. You'll use this extra leather for the other parts of the moccasin we'll cut out later. You'll also need a spool of fake sinew, a sharp awl, a glover's needle, needle nose pliers, heavy-duty scissors or shears, a utility knife or sharp pen knife, ruler, pen, and pencil. First, we'll draw the outline for the soles onto the leather. Leather has 2 sides, the smooth side and the rough side. The smooth side of the tanned leather was on the outside of the animal and originally had hair that was removed during the tanning process. The rough side was on the inside of the animal, the flesh side. We want to end up with the smooth side of the latigo leather on the outside of your moccasin sole and the rough surface inside next to your foot. Because it's difficult to draw with a pen on the rough side, we'll turn over our sole patterns and draw them on the smooth side of the leather. Remember, the smooth side of the latigo will become the outside bottom of your moccasins. Cut around the outline carefully, using heavy-duty leather shears or a very sharp utility knife. If the leather is thick, it may be slow going, even with the heavy-duty scissors. A utility knife can make the cuts easier. If you're using a utility knife, protect your work surface. Be careful. Younger crafts workers should ask an adult to help with this part of the project. Mark the right and left sole on the rough side. Lay out the leather for the uppers smooth side up. You are going to cut out a right and left upper. Place your pattern to the edge of the leather so that you will have a maximum amount of leather left over for the other pieces, such as the tongue. Draw the outline for the right and left uppers and cut them out. On the rough side of the leather, mark the right and left pieces. From the remaining leather, cut out two 2-inch square pieces for the tongue. We'll also need long strips of leather for the tie thong and the welt. To make the most use of the leather scraps, you can cut long strips about 1/4 inch wide out of a rounded piece of leather. Follow the curve around and around and then gently stretch out the leather strip. You may need to trim the strip to a uniform width. For the tie thongs, you'll need two 24-inch long pieces about 1/4 inch wide. Now for the welt. In the latter part of the 19th century, Cheyenne moccasin makers began adding a thin strip of leather called the welt, a design innovation borrowed from shoe and saddle making. The welt is stitched in between the upper and the sole to protect the stitches and to keep out dirt and moisture. It makes replacing worn-out soles easier and allows you to reuse the beaded uppers. It should be at least 1/4 inch wide and long enough to go around the outside of the sole, plus enough to overlap a little at the heel. To keep this beginner's project simple, we're not going to add beadwork. But if you choose to add a lot of beadwork or fully bead your moccasins, any beadwork should be added before sewing the upper to the sole. Before beading, we suggest you refer to our video, How to Bead Native American Style Volume 2, Lazy Stitch. Also, understand that some men's and women's beadwork designs and colors are different from tribe to tribe. In order to be respectful to Native American culture, you should research what's appropriate before attempting any decoration. Later on, we'll show you different tribal styles that you can try in later projects. To make the sewing go faster, we're going to pre-punch the sole. You use an awl to make the holes. You can make an awl with large needles such as a yarn darner and a piece of deer antler or dowel rod, or buy an awl at your craft shop. Using an awl, begin at the toe and work along the edge, punching holes 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch apart. Your awl should start about 1/4 inch in from the edge and go through at an angle. Push the awl and come out the edge, about halfway through the thickness of the sole. If the leather gives way and you rip out a stitch, move over 1/4 inch and continue. Taking your time, continue on around the sole until you reach the starting point. Next, we're going to stitch the upper, the welt, and the sole together. Cut an 8-foot length of fake sinew. Cut plenty so you won't have to tie knots and add more sinew later. Split the sinew in two and pull into 2 pieces. To make a piece round, roll it on a flat surface with one hand while you pull the sinew through with the other hand. Thread the glover's needle and pull the thread on through about 6 inches. We're going to sew our moccasins together inside out and then later turn them right side out. This method keeps the thread from being exposed on the bottom of the sole and prevents the thread from wearing out quickly. Lay down the upper with the rough side down, smooth side up. Next, lay the sole smooth side down, rough side up. Lay the welt around the sole. Since only the edge of the welt will show, either the rough or smooth surface can face out. Begin at the top of the toe. Align the sole with the middle of the welt and the upper. The welt should be even with the edge of the sole, and the upper should come up about 1/8 of an inch. Use the needle nose pliers to help push the needle through the leather and pull it through. For the first stitch only, pull the thread through halfway. We'll use the remaining half of the thread to stitch down the other side. Use a whip stitch. Go through the upper, the welt, and the pre-punched holes. Pull each stitch tight so that the welt and upper are snug against the sole. Notice how the upper laps over and lays on the edge of the flat surface of the sole. Work down about 2/3 of the way down one side. Take the needle off and rethread it on the remaining thread. Go back through the hole of the first stitch. Stitch 2/3 of the way down the other side. Then complete the first side. Then finish the second side so the upper meets at the back of the heel. Begin at the back of the moccasin and start to turn it inside out. Continue by pulling the heel flaps toward the toe. Continue to pull the sides and push the toe out. Take your time and work the sole through the moccasin. After turning, smooth and stretch the leather back into shape. Try on the moccasin. Crease the leather at the back of the heel with your fingernail or the tip of the awl. Trim off any excess leather. Overlap the two ends of the welt and finish with 1 or 2 more stitches. Tie the two ends of the thread together with a square knot. Add a couple of more knots over the square knot to make sure the knot won't slip. Cut off one of the threads. Again, turn the heel inside out to sew up the back. Rethread your needle with the remaining thread and sew up the back with a whip stitch to about 3/4 of an inch from the top. Tie off at the top with a knot and cut off the excess thread. If the flaps are uneven, trim off the excess to make both sides even. The tongue can either be left plain or notched slightly. Take one of the 2-inch squares you cut out earlier and position it on top of the T-cut. At the corner of the tongue, pull the needle and the thread through and make a knot. Sew on the tongue using a whip stitch. Tie off at the end with another knot. Use a piece of wood to protect the inside of the moccasin. Carefully cut 3 pairs of small slits spaced equally along each side about 1 inch down from the top of the flap. Use the awl to help push the tie thong through the slits. Then lace up your moccasins. Trim the welt to make it even along the edge of the moccasins. Congratulations! Your moccasins are now ready to wear. Once you've made a basic pair of hard-sole moccasins, you can add decorative touches to later projects. Beads, metal spots, and tin cones are available at craft stores. You should add this decoration before you sew the uppers, the welt, and the sole together. The tin cones and fringe are usually men's accessories. Infant-sized moccasins are made using the same steps to create a pattern as for an adult. Measure the length and the width of the baby's foot and use those measurements to create your pattern. You might want to make your pattern a little larger to give the baby's feet some growing room. When drawing the upper pattern, add 1 inch to the vertical measurement instead of 2 or 2.5 inches as you would an adult. Otherwise, all other steps in construction are the same. Unless the moccasins are going to get a lot of wear, you can leave out the welt if you wish. You may want to decorate the uppers with beadwork before sewing them to the sole. There are several different styles of high-top hard-sole boots, but basically you sew a rectangular piece of leather called a top to the moccasin upper with a whip stitch. This top part of the boot extends to just below the knee. A traditional woman's boot has small tie thongs spaced up the leg. For a more rustic mountain man look, the top is tied up the leg with a leather thong. Depending upon what style of boot you wish to make, the top piece can either be a tube with or without a side flap, or it can be tailored. You may wish to leave additional leather at the top if you want to have fringe. We suggest that you experiment with some scrap cloth until you're sure the top fits well before you cut out the leather. For specific tribal styles, further research is recommended. Here's a beautiful pair of tailored Kiowa ladies' boots that have been decorated with traditional beadwork and silver spots. There's one difference in the moccasin upper pattern. Instead of cutting a T, you cut a V. Measure the distance from the floor to your ankle bone, in this case 2.5 inches. Add a 1/2 inch. Then measure in that distance on your moccasin pattern on each side. Our example is 3 inches. Draw an inverted V from each point to the center. Cut out your pattern. For low and high cut styles, the sole and the upper are sewn together the same way. Here you can see the finished lower moccasin just before the top is sewn to it. When you look at Plains Indian hard sole moccasins closely, you'll begin to see distinctive tribal characteristics, differences in how the moccasin was made and in the beadwork designs. Keep in mind there are no hard and fast rules, but here are some things to look for in Sioux, Cheyenne, and Kiowa styles. Sioux moccasins often have the tongue piece split. It's also typical to have the flaps cut straight and finished off with a cloth trim. Cheyenne moccasins usually have longer flaps cut at an angle without cloth trim. A fully beaded moccasin usually has 7 designs around the perimeter with 1 at the toe. Often there is a vertical lane of beadwork going up the heel. Moccasins can also be partially beaded. But this beautiful exception, while Cheyenne in many ways doesn't have the beadwork at the heel. These may be Arapaho, neighbors to the Cheyenne. These striking shoes show a classic Cheyenne woman's design. Both Sioux and Cheyenne men's moccasins use the mountain or pyramid design. Here's a typical Sioux approach and a Cheyenne version. With what you've learned so far, would you say these are Cheyenne or Sioux? While the tongue and flaps say Sioux, the designs and bead placement and the heel suggest Cheyenne. Maybe a Cheyenne woman beaded these for a Sioux man. So there are no absolute rules. Moccasins with beaded soles are mistakenly called burial moccasins. Occasionally, an owner of this special style of moccasin was buried in them, but they were primarily created for and worn at special ceremonial occasions. Kiowas tend toward partially beaded moccasins, sometimes painted with natural paints, like the yellow and black on this pair. The vamp has a row of tin cones down the front, 2 lanes of beadwork, and a medallion on the tongue. Larger flaps, decorated with a single row of beadwork, are sewn to the sides. They are finished with a trail of fringe known as a duster. Tradition has it that this long fringe helps erase a warrior's tracks. This is only an introduction. There are beautiful examples of hard-sole moccasins from many other Plains tribes. Annabelle Medicine Chips is a Southern Cheyenne moccasin maker and made the moccasins for the cover of this video. As a girl of 8, she began learning from her mother and grandmother.
They used to let me bead with their scraps, just beads that they couldn't use or leather they didn't need, and then they would cut out maybe a little bag, a little purse, and that's how I learned. That make marks on there that I could follow.
Now retired from a career as a registered nurse, Annabelle beads for her family and fills custom orders from dancers, collectors, and trading posts throughout Indian country. She still knows how to stitch on beadwork the old way, a technique that is hardly done anymore. Instead of thread, she uses sinew, the tendon of a deer or elk. She peels off a strand of deer sinew and twists the end.
You cut it kind of slant, not straight across. And then that way it makes a good point, and then the beads can go through it.
She ties a knot in one end. Annabelle uses an awl to make a hole for the sinew. She picks up the sinew close to the end and pushes it through the hole. She pulls it through to the knot.
Oh, yeah.
See? Then you tie your knot here. Never make knots under the
Why?
because when you put them on, every little knot or whatever will hurt your feet.
She picks up enough beads and threads them onto the sinew. Again, using the awl, she makes another hole and pulls the beads taut. Although she's now using the contemporary hot colors that young people like on this high-top boot, Annabelle's exacting craftsmanship preserves a centuries-old Cheyenne tradition. Air Force General Mike Kostelnik is a nationally known moccasin maker. Beginning as a Boy Scout, he was drawn to making moccasins.
There is no other piece of material culture that is so Native American than moccasins. I mean, it is the essential piece of American Indian clothing that probably first and foremost was what they wore. And I spent a lot of time making moccasins, you know, somewhere over 75 or 80 pair. And in all those shoes that I've made, I have never made the perfect pair. What you want is one that is comfortable, that you can wear.
Mike has researched how to create museum-quality examples of the late 19th century style. He shares his work in a column he writes for Whispering Winds magazine. He studied the stresses that turning a moccasin can put on leather and how to avoid tearing the leather along the T-cut.
When you do this T-cut, rather than cutting that in and leaving that stress point where you've cut with scissors and you've got this cut line going into the leather, rather than cutting to the edge, punch a hole in with the awl at the end point. And so you have a hole right where this T-cut is going to end, and then rather than cutting all the way through, you end the cut line on the inside of where the awl hole is, so you don't have that stress fracture going through. And that will allow you to have more strength in the leather.
Mike's found that the most important measurement is the arch of the foot.
It's much more important than the length of your foot. It's not something that's measured in contemporary white shoes or some arbitrary standards, but in Indian shoes this is a very important dimension. So regardless of which upper pattern you use, the last thing you should do before you cut the leather to the pattern shape is to check this dimension, that you have enough length to go from this sole over the top of the shoe comfortably to the other end of the sole, and then allowing for perhaps a 3/8 inch additional leather on either end.
After making so many pairs of moccasins, Mike has encouragement for people just starting out.
I think with the right materials, soles, be they rawhide or some commercial product, latigo or whatever, the sufficient thickness and stability, and uppers with the reasonable flexibility and a good pattern, and a little bit of attention to detail around the critical things about the instep lane, and a little bit of care in tracing your foot to the product. And I think anybody can make a pair they can wear first time out of the barrel.
We hope you've enjoyed how to make moccasins and will try your hand at making a pair. For more how-to instruction on Native American beadwork, watch our How to Bead series. For more information about Plains hard sole moccasins, we recommend the Missouri River brand pattern, available at your local craft supply store. To receive a free catalog of other full circle videos on Native American crafts, dance, and culture, call or write us. Thanks for watching.